So today's session, it's going to go for around 40 minutes plus 20 minutes for questions. Please remember, this is as interactive as possible. We have three amazing panelists who I'll touch on in a tick, but it will be sent out, the webinar and recording 24 hours following. So tomorrow at around 11 a.m., we'll send out a link to the webinar and a PDF to the PowerPoint as well. So if you have not used Zoom, because you might be from other platforms, check out, you can go and chuck your questions in here. The chat is also open to everyone, some thoughts as we go along as well. And we're going to be doing a few polls as we move along, just to get people's thoughts to try and drive some interaction discussion. So to our amazing panelists, and there's nothing like having a group of great thinkers coming together. So joining us today, we have Paul, Jay, and Tim. G'day, guys.
G'day.
Buddy, how are you? Hope everybody's well.
So for those of you who don't know, Paul has over 40 years of experience in the fleet management industry gained in Australia, New Zealand, and the UK, having managed fleets some of the fleet's large private companies, most of whom are household name, to small to medium entities and government agencies. So very diverse, and he still has a full head of hair. Joining Paul is Jay, who before joining Zurich, in the insurance-based sector in Melbourne, servicing clients both nationally and in New Zealand. During this time, he's utilised his prior experience of over 20 years in both property management in various sectors, including government, health, construction, and military. And our final panelist is Tim Roberts. He has over 30 years in the fleet industry and has now stepped away from his full-time role in the sector. And he's doing the things he's passionate about, which includes well-being, road safety topics, including developing toolbox talks for the NRSPP. And he's also a keen cyclist and astronomer. Welcome, guys.
G'day, Jerome. How are you?
So diving on in now, into our first thing we're going to do is explore what is well-being. I know just what our audience thinks around the poll. Launched it, hopefully it's gone out, and we just keen to see what people think about well-being means and what you have in place. So one thing in place, post the standard EAP, or 10 actively incorporated workers empowerment failed to launch. Well, that's a bit of a problem. Anyway, a bit of a thing from the chat instead. Let us.
Well, it looks like we've got a bit of a technical problem there, doesn't it?
Looks like we've lost him.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah. Just listening to Jerome then, the voice was quite broken up, but I guess we got the gist of the start of the conversation and the poll that they were running and the nature of what is well-being. Jerome, are you back with us?
I am. Sorry about this, guys. I'm not sure what's happened technology-wise. Anyway, I won't say I'm using Optus, but I am. Well, let's just throw it out there. Put it in the chat. What do people think about well-being? And we'll move on to the next sort of slide as well. Just define it as well. So, Paul, do you want to explain what you think what well-being definition is?
Yes, certainly. Well-being is everything to do with how a driver or how a person is feeling emotionally, physically, and it's not just them, it's about people around them, how they're interacting with people, etc. So hopefully that gives a broad outlook, but well-being is affected not only by your physical attributes, it's also how well rested you are, how well you sleep, what you eat, your exercise, etc. So there's so many things that affect well-being.
Yeah, Paul, I'd have to agree with that. I think you've hit on some of the main points there. I mean, but for me, one of the elements is that well-being influences every aspect of somebody's life, the workplace and private, and the barrier is porous. It leaks into each of them, and the aspects in particular of diet, exercise, distraction, and fatigue seem to come up again and again, and the key to it. If you don't feel good at home, you don't feel good in the workplace. If you don't feel good in the workplace, you don't feel good at home. So it's 24 hours a day. Can I do a little bit of a visualization exercise, perhaps? If I can get this done in a minute, this is really good. Imagine a square and call that your driver. And then divide it down the center and divide it across. So you've got 4 equal squares, right? So color those. Top left-hand square will color blue. Top right-hand square will color green. Bottom right-hand square will color amber. And bottom left-hand square will color red, right? So call the blue one control. We'll call the green one manage. We'll call the amber one aware. And we'll call the red one unaware. The top 2, the blue and the green, are what happens in the workplace. Things with drivers that we can control or manage. The bottom 2 are what happens in the private space, and we'll call one aware and one unaware. And that's us as an organisation or a society. We may be aware of what's going on in somebody's life, and that would be the amber one. We may be unaware, and that would be the red one. Now, we can influence collectively or as an organisation, we can influence each of those, but the ability to steer that influence very much depends on what we're aware of, particularly with that porous link between drivers' private and work lives, right? So that bottom 2 lines, imagine the gap between the amber and the red as a slider. If you slide the line to the left, you get a longer amber rectangle, and that's where we're aware of something. And if we're aware of something with regards to our drivers, then we can have perhaps more steered influence. But if we're unaware of something, that area becomes a greater red area, and we're unaware, we're unable to steer that influence, right? So then take that entire box and flip it on its head, turn it 180 degrees. The private life is at the top, the work life is at the bottom. Run your thumb along the line that divides them so it blurs, and imagine gravity letting all that leak in. So all those elements of wellness that we talked about actually affect what's happening in the workplace, and that determines to a large degree how well our drivers are. So I don't know whether that's easy to follow or easy to imagine in your own minds, but it just sort of shows that everything is integrated, and no matter where and what happens in an individual's life, it affects them in the workplace and it affects them at home. What we do in the workplace with control and management, with our drivers and with the work environment, affects somebody at home. And conversely, whatever's happening at home, whether aware of it or not, affects them in the workplace. And the key to extending into that area of awareness where we can't control and manage is really about engagement and trust. And maybe we can talk about that a little bit later in the webinar. So, yeah.
Thanks, Tim. That's really powerful as well. And I think that's really, everyone in the audience, a lot of people going to the chat, 7s to 8s, which shows that there's a lot of people, organizations are very mature. And I think that's where we sort of, you look at how it sort of flows through. And I think what you just touched on then, a lot of people be interested to know what yes, no, not sure about how does driving, how does your mental space, how does your head space, how does your well-being flow into when you're driving behind the wheel? Because as you were just pointing out then, you can't just, when you get into the vehicle, you don't just change modes and leave everything outside the vehicle and do the driving task. Then you get out of the vehicle and then it flows through again.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree with it, Jerome. It's impossible to de-link personal, private, and work lives, and that then goes into the driving environment. Whether it's driving for work, whether they're professional drivers or occasional drivers, every time they step into that workplace, their wellness really impacts risk. Again, going back to distraction, fatigue, and everything else that goes with that. But what we've got to also remember as organisations when we're dealing with our people is what happens in between those two. So the commute's a big thing for me. And I've used this example before. In some of the industries that we have where drivers are responsible for profoundly important roles on the road, they may drive from home through peak hour traffic. They get to the workplace, they pick up a vehicle which may be full of equipment or a heavy vehicle. They go out to the workplace, they perform a job all day long. They come back to the workplace, the depot, they drop that vehicle off, they climb in their own vehicle and they drive off. You know, we have put them through the worst environmental and risk environments to get them to do that job. And they may not even be professional drivers. Now, they've got to be in peak condition to do that, you know, for their own welfare and safety and also for the community at large. And if they're not, then that increases the risk substantially, I think.
Well, seeing a lot of these days which have great policies and procedures and advice around wellbeing and so forth, but quite often I believe it might be the pressure that the business or the role is also placed upon them from over. So we'll see excellent wellbeing programs, lots of education, but still expecting their drivers to be able to complete quite difficult routes or really time-sensitive routes, particularly to delivering, say, perishable products. And so quite often these time frames, these deadlines can also impact on well-being and make people perhaps a little more testy when they're behind the wheel than what they would be otherwise.
Yeah, you're 100% right, because stress is one of the worst factors for drivers these days. And we all have our own pressures. We have cost of living pressures. We have everything on top of work stress. You drive how you feel. Emotion affects how you feel. So if you've had a stressful day at work, guess how you're going to drive going home? You will drive erratically. You won't be concentrating like you should be. And the vehicle is the biggest weapon anybody has control of. Okay, it's the most dangerous thing anybody will have control of in their life. And so it's important that, you know, they understand their well-being.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Going back to those little boxes, the blue and the green box, control and management, we can control the type of asset, where it's used, how it's used. We have our policies and procedures, our job instructions. So we have great controls over those. What we need to be able to understand is how that impacts the other aspects of a driver's life, you know, in terms of their well-being in the workplace, but also their well-being at home.
So on that now, we'll move to the next one, because I think the catalyst for where this came from, and I'll throw across to Paul, the catalyst where this sort of came from is we'll sort of look at, we touched on the duty of care and how driving links into how people perform and all those sort of elements going through. So, but what's the organisation's duty of care to this, Paul? And what was the trigger? Do you want to share your story as to where this sort of came from?
Yeah, sure. I was visiting a client on behalf of the accident management side of the business that we do, and presenting their reports on a 6-monthly basis. And I was sitting in the reception area and waiting to be called into the meeting. And they had the board up in the reception area that recorded the number of days incident-free. And it had on there 300 days incident-free, which is fantastic achievement. Now, this was a large public company in the manufacturing area. I was called into the meeting, and present in the meeting was the fleet manager, the HR manager, and the work health and safety manager. And I congratulated them on the fact that they were reporting 300 days injury-free. But I said, hang on a minute, you've had some severe car accidents that are in our reports in the last 6 months, of which we know at least 2 of the drivers were seriously injured. All 3 of them looked at each other, and all of a sudden they realised, because they're a manufacturing organisation, they had only been reporting incidents in the factory. They have forgot about the incidents that occurred in vehicles. They weren't perceiving the car as an extension of the workplace, which, as we all know, under the Health and Safety Act, the car is part of the workplace.
Yeah, it's a fundamental part of the workplace with additional risk, I would expect, in most workplaces. So it's hard to understand, isn't it, Paul?
It's totally hard to understand. And especially being a large public company, they had reported it in their annual report as no incidents during that previous year. And so it was a false statement, and they actually had to go back and retract through their annual report.
So that was really one of the sort of the catalysts we're sort of looking at for this webinar, where we sat there and said, okay, from an organizational point of view, understanding the responsibilities, the duty of care. Then the other part is really engaging, because at this time of year, and we'll touch on this in a moment, around the importance of driver wellbeing and the pressure as we lead up into the Christmas sort of period. But just looking at the data as well, Very keen. So if we look at the safe work data, Jay, did you want to touch on this as we go through it?
Sure. So a lot of the collisions that you'll see there, like vehicle collision, hit by moving objects, falling from height and so forth, they're pretty standard workplace injuries, but the vehicle collision, as you can see, there's 41%. It's a very high percentage of accidents causing fatalities using vehicles. So 3 out of 4 fatalities involving a vehicle. By far, it's the most dangerous thing that the vast majority of people will ever do in their working life is operate a vehicle. That goes above many other workplaces which may come to mind as being fairly dangerous, but in fact it's operating a vehicle. And insurance stats have proven this time and again, year after year.
Thanks for that, Jay. Does this surprise anyone at all? Because the vehicle consistently remains one of the number one risks for workers relates to injury and serious injury. And if you look at it from the hospital point of view as well, in regards to the portion of hospitalized industries, and this is where you got to sort of look at this, is people involved in road trauma, the damage to the human body is enormous. The only one that actually has a higher level are those who have been thermal causes as a result of burns. But when transport crashes, you can sort of see the number of hours represented in ICU is significantly overrepresented in that sort of data when it goes through. So this is one of the really interesting elements that a lot of people do not quite understand or look at as to how people and the cause it goes through from the whole damage as a result of a vehicle. And as Jody and a few others are pointing out, there's this whole damage of not understanding what the vehicle is, the damage, the risk controls, and those sort of pressures. And the other part can even be is you can do everything in your power to have a safe worker. And this is where one of the questions that came in just through the chat, are we looking at just the workers or the commute? Because the other thing is road safety is a shared responsibility, and everyone, there could be the X factors, other groups outside that can go through an impact. So one of the aim is to raise the understanding of the entire community of the risk of driving full stop.
It's a couple of really good points in there, and might drift off topic a little bit with this, Jerome, but just in terms of case studies and who, if the question came in about who we're talking about, well, I guess we're talking about everybody that steps into a vehicle that might be linked to an organisation, but also other road users that are out there. One of the areas that I recall, you know, in my days as a commercial fleet manager, were that we were managing a fleet for, oh goodness me, the better part of 10 years. We had a good understanding of that fleet. We thought we were doing a great job, and then we had a team go in, a road safety team go in there, and what they actually uncovered was that the number of users of vehicles within that organisation was actually triple, and they were using grey fleet, private vehicles used for business purposes. So, you know, these were people that weren't professional drivers. They weren't tasked with driving as part of their job. They weren't assigned vehicles, but they were still driving their own vehicles out there. Now, there was no clear understanding of the condition of those vehicles that were being driven. And you would think over, this is nearly 25 years ago that this happened, you would think over that period that things would have changed. But in talking to people today, grey fleet is still a huge issue, and we have those lack of controls. So then going back to the cars and the serious injury part of it, we've been progressively engineering cars which are far safer in terms of how they perform in crashes and things like that. But what we can't engineer is the human body. So you get to the point where, you know, the vehicle is doing everything it can to protect the occupants inside, but the traumatic damage is actually occurring because the human body can't withstand the forces that are actually there. What we can do is influence the way that people use those assets, and that's probably the key to it.
We'll just move on to the next slide as well now, and you can just talk to the reasoning on this sort of, Paul. I just thought before you just dive in as well, like on that commute question that's been raised, and I know, Amy, you mentioned how it's picked up in New Zealand. I'll just quickly share before we go in, is around this time of year, a few years ago, one of our partners mentioned how a lady was heading into work over in Perth. Her partner double parked. She opened the door to scoot out to go into her office of operations. When she opened her door, she car doored a colleague from that organisation who finished up going off to hospital with a serious injury. As a result, both of them went home and they had a big impact through the entire organisation. So whilst the commute isn't in some states picked up, the impact that it has can be far reaching if people are in a rush just to get things done and they're just cutting the corners to go through as fast as they can. So I'll just pass over to you, Paul, to talk through what you're sort of seeing and what this data represents in this slide here.
Yeah, sure. Just want to talk about the peak times of year, because especially as we're heading into Christmas right now, we're going into the silly season. You'll notice that the peak periods for accidents are toward leading into Christmas, so November, December, and then you start going into Easter in March. And the reason for that is the pressures that are put on people to complete things before the Christmas period. The stress is maximized because they've got to do more deliveries. If they're in the retail sector, especially, the amount of food, extra food that's got to be delivered out there. And so you tend to see accidents have their peak periods. And so during that lead up to Christmas, people need to be aware that the risks are much higher than what they are any other time of the year, and the same leading into Easter. The little chart below just shows there's actually a lag effect in people reporting accidents, because if they have an accident pre-Christmas, they need that car for their holiday period, so they don't get it repaired until generally after the holiday period. So if you had the true statistics of when the accident occurred on top of when it's reported, then the figures are much higher leading into these two periods. So I just wanted to make people aware of how those periods affect people's stress and how they drive.
It's an interesting point you make, Michael. Quite often what is periods also interspersed with lots of extra functions in their life, due to whether it's Christmas or /in.
Jay, I think Paul and Tim, are you finding Jay's having some sound issues?
Yeah.
It is breaking up a bit, Jay. Yeah.
Have you got two mics open, as Matthew's just asked?
Just saying this year you also get a lot of people doing a lot of nights early due to the I guess the seasons. So
Jay, we might just see if you can just log out and come back, if that's all right. I'm sorry, everyone, as we can't really understand what you're saying, and there's a lot of feedback. So if you can exit and come back, we'll let you back in, of course. So just touching on here now, Paul, do you want to dive into this one, talking about what are your organizational elements in here that you're really responsible for?
Well, it's not just staff working on the road, but if a general accident is usually affecting someone else in the public. So it's usually another commuter that they're crashing into. So organisations need to be aware part of their duty of care is not just their staff, but it's all the other road users as well. And workers driving to and from work, we've just commented on that already. So workers commuting are also part of this, because you've got the stress of work carries over to their trip home, but there's also the stress at home before they leave for work that they carry driving to work. So organisations need to have that awareness. But what I also want to show on the right-hand side here is the iceberg and the iceberg effect on accidents, because everybody knows what the accident cost in repairing that vehicle is, but they don't understand what the underlying costs of that accident are. So for every dollar spent on the repair, it equates from $8 to $53 for the unknown costs, what we call the hidden insurance costs. So what are they? It's if a driver's been injured, then they're going to be away from work. It's the absenteeism from work. There's lost productivity or efficiency of that service provision. There'll be late deliveries if they're a delivery driver, or failure to deliver the service all full stop, which will affect that brand of that company. So you've got brand reputation in there, particularly if the driver is driving a branded vehicle. Every time they're involved in an accident, that's public perception of that brand. Okay. There's also a high staff turnover if staff are aware that their employers don't have respect for duty of care. And so, if they know the employer doesn't care about their well-being, a lot of drivers will move on. There's a low morale because of that as well. There's the investigation and administrative costs of an accident. There's the time it takes to put through a claim, have the car off the road, etc. But someone needs to investigate that accident as well. Why did it happen? What can we do to prevent it happening? There's also training that's on the back of that. So if you do know what caused it, what training can be implemented to prevent that happening again? If a driver's away from work, you may have to employ temporary workers as well to replace them in that role. But if the driver doesn't come back, they're off for a long time, you're probably going to be hired to replace that driver full time. And what about the penalties and fines that could be put in place because of the cause of that incident? So there's all these hidden costs that relate to an accident that most people just aren't aware of and don't take into account.
Thanks for that, Paul. And I just thought, look, there's one comment that was provided through in the chat to us directly from, made the point that WorkSafe laws only pick up the commute in Queensland, and obviously someone made the point from New Zealand as well. Other states do not require the commute. Yet one of the interesting things is, despite this, in Victoria, there was recently where a mechanic drove home fatigued, crashed and died, and the company was found negligent. So it's interesting that even though the commute doesn't matter, it shows it does matter. So there's obviously every incentive. And the other complexities I'll point out, on average, a lot of Australians in particular, evidence indicates that about 84% of people think they're an amazing driver. So how do you then, if you had a duty of care, how do you as an organisation influence these drivers to be safe on the road when they're out and about? Because you have a duty of care as an organisation to make sure they are. And as that case pointed out that took place in Victoria, you want to make sure they get home safely as well. So it does go from the door, from the office to the door, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
It definitely does. Yeah. There are organisations, in question of how some organisations deal with it. There are organisations, I see it sometimes in the FIFO environment where drivers are not to drive their own vehicles, once they leave the work site, take the flights home and get there. But I see car parks full of vehicles where that's obviously not the case that's happening. So it's quite patchy. A couple of things that, that awareness is a really important thing. For instance, it's not always possible. You've got to be reasonable with everything, but staggering start and finish times so they don't occur during peak periods. Why would you do that? It's less time exposed in traffic when somebody is at their worst. They're commuting into the office or the workplace and they're thinking about what they've got during the day, and it may be a tough day for them, or they're coming home after a long day and their mind's distracted by other things, either what happened at work or what's going to happen at home. And if you can minimize the amount of time that they're exposed to traffic and other users are exposed to them if they're fatigued, that would be one thing. And also the time of day is a really important part of that. The other thing to be aware of with the workforce generally nowadays is that cost of living pressures, as we know, suburbs are expanding, people moving to the outer suburbs, which means that commute is even longer than it ever was. And look, my own personal example was that I chose to live well outside the suburbs, and I did a calculation that over 15 years of my working life, I was sitting in my car in a commute for 1 year, 24/7. When I did that calculation, it had a big impact on what my future looked like, and I decided to make some changes. But if you think about the profound amount of time that people spend in their cars commuting each day, limiting the risk in any practical way possible is a really important thing, not only as a matter of risk, but also a matter as driver well-being, I think.
Jay, we've got you back, mate. Would you like to add some thoughts in? Fingers crossed it all works well.
I'll do my best. Look, I just wanted to pick up on a point that Jody made in the chat about many companies providing cars, not teaching drivers to operate the vehicle, just checking that they've got a license. And that's 100% true. And that really plays into some of these road safety risks that we're talking about today. I've seen so many fleets where a business will look at nothing more than just make sure the person has the piece of plastic, the driver's license, but they won't do anything about checking to make sure that that license is actually valid. Again, on the training side of things, operating the vehicle, if I could maybe tell a little story about a fleet that I worked with a while back, where they had drivers who were going out to sites and then operating like arborist equipment such as shredders and chippers for trees. Now, they were making sure that all of these operators of these equipment were regularly tested and qualified and requalified every couple of years, because they knew just how dangerous these chippers were. If you get an arm caught in, you're pretty much goodbye to your arm. But after a number of accidents, we got them thinking around, well, maybe we actually need to start reinvesting in some training of the drivers, because we're able to paint the picture that the vehicle driving in is like a 2-ton chipper that can also do 100 kilometres an hour and interact with other people on the road. And once we started changing that mindset that, hold on a minute, it's not just the stationary equipment that's really, really dangerous, but what they're using day after day after day, going to and from sites, is even more dangerous, because it can travel so fast. It can interact with hundreds of people on the road, and one slip of concentration is all it takes for a chipper to cause damage. So imagine if that chipper was doing 100 kilometres an hour and weighing a whole lot more. It was a no-brainer for them. Training plays a major part, and then that the well-being piece obviously plays into the training as well.
Oh, Jay, it's a really good point. I recall a fleet where a new vehicle was put on and it had lane departure, blind spot monitoring, AEB. So all the good features that you expect to help somebody whilst they're on the road. But those features weren't explained to the driver, and they became a distraction and a stress point for them. And they actually tagged the vehicle out because it was pulling them back on the road, it's pulling up behind other vehicles, all the other stuff. So that training aspect is a really important part, A, of making sure that the workplace is safer, and B, the well-being of the driver. You don't want to stress them out with additional safety features as well. So it's a really good point.
And I'll just put it out to the audience as well. Just be keen to know, how do you check in with your driver? Because quite often, if they're not coming in the office, what's the process? If you only see them once a week, is there a way you can check in with them remotely as well? And I'll just quickly share one quick story as well around that vehicle training and the importance of it. There was an organisation up in Queensland where a lady, she had a pool vehicle, she came out, she jumped in it, she drove off. I think it was in the heat of the day, left the depot and was going along. And when she was driving down the freeway down there, she started waving her door open on the car. And because she couldn't work out how to put the windows down or to put the air conditioning units on or anything like this on a hot, steamy day up in Brisbane. And the reason the organisation found out about this is because the police officers sitting behind the vehicle watching its door wave as it's going down the freeway as this lady's trying to cool down her car. And she was a bit of an elderly lady. So when they pulled the car over and this story got shared, she wasn't held to account. They showed her how to do the vehicle. But the point came back when she left, she had no idea how to do this in this new vehicle. So the risk came back onto her and the organisation, and it was fed through from the police. So that driver training and the pressure on the driver when they're going through, especially if you get hot and get flustered and the pressure point that we're going through at this time of year. I think, and that's a good segue for our next sort of one as well, is just sort of thinking about, do you know you're driving, who your workers are driving and what they're in, and basically what your driving community is seeing around that. So Paul, do you want to touch and just walk through this for us?
Yeah, sure. So obviously you've got your tool of trade fleet vehicles, which includes trucks and light commercials. You've got your grey fleet. So most people know what the grey fleet is. It's not company owned, but they drive for work anyway. So it's their own vehicle they're driving. You've got a grey motorbike, and remembering there's a lot of motorbikes out there being used for work too, particularly in the gig economy that are delivering, online food that's been ordered, etc. But a new term that I come across, thanks to the guys on this call, is double grey, which is you're using someone else's car to do your work duties. So a double exposure comes into play, and that's an interesting one to think about. But you've got to think about your taxi policy. When should taxis be used, etc. Rideshare policy as well, to try and maximise, especially people that are tired going home, coming to work. Rideshare is a great way to go, or a rideshare vehicle. And e-scooters, which are becoming popular as well, the risks that are involved. So all of these are captured. Your workers will definitely be using one form of this transport.
Absolutely.
Interesting one. Sorry, go, Jay.
Jump in. I love this because I find grey fleet one of those areas where so many fleets, or so many businesses, I should say, don't really understand or don't know their true exposure.
Yeah.
I'll give you two quick examples. I worked with a council a little while back which had an owned and operated fleet of around 300 vehicles. When we went through the process of identifying grey fleet, there was another 600. And one of those included a volunteer who was driving a 1970, let's say a 1975 model Kingswood. And not only was that being used for council business, but she was delivering Meals on Wheels and sometimes also picking up members of the community and driving them to doctor's appointments in that Kingswood. So she was conducting a transport of members of the public in a 1975 model Kingswood. The only safety features would be drum brakes and a seatbelt. And going also onto the other side of things too, the fleet vehicles impacting in the rideshare economy. I have seen several vehicles in my time when I travel around the country where I've been picked up by Uber drivers who are driving company vehicles, and you can tell because they've either got some sort of sticker on the inside or they've still got badging on the outside. So it's the double whammy where they're driving these things for work, but then they're also picking up not only the stresses of the day, but the stresses of the afternoon or the weekend, because they're driving these vehicles for their own business purposes through whether it's Uber or some other delivering pizzas or whatnot. And so it's that flow-on effect, the doubling up of all that driving, the extra stresses and so forth. And so it can be quite a minefield.
And the comment about also hire vehicles as well, because that can create a lot of angst on people. Like if your company has a policy of 5-star or those sort of components, and the worker rocks up for the vehicle and the vehicle's not what meets company specs, what happens? Are they able to take the vehicle? What's the pressure point mean? What does that mean? And then have they got the vehicle sitting there? The other thing is I have heard where there was a story when we were developing grey fleet work around this, was a person went out in a regional area in, once again, Queensland, picked up the vehicle, and they did their usual walk around, but they didn't check inside the vehicle. And then the vehicle drove down the road. They were about 10 k's out of the town, and they had she then had an incident where she drove into the side of the road because inside the car had been left open to cool down, and a snake had moved in under her seat and then wrapped around her leg while she was driving. So there's these complexities as to what does that then mean for these people? And I love the point around different cars use different sound systems, CarPlay, all these sort of interactions. What does that mean? How do you onboard people? What does it add to the pressure when someone's driving?
That's right. And speaking of pressure whilst operating those vehicles, the grey fleet question, or the double grey and so forth, also plays a factor when the vehicle may not be ergonomic too. So if you've got someone operating in a sedan vehicle, delivering in and out of the boot all day, that can have ergonomic impacts. So that can impact not only physically, but again in the well-being, because you can be absolutely exhausted by the end of the day, constantly loading and unloading from a vehicle that is not fit for purpose.
There's another interesting factor too. If you think about a pool fleet of cars, and now the people transfer into EVs, if a driver hasn't been shown how to operate that EV properly, they will, if they do accelerate faster, they are totally different to drive. You can't just hand someone a set of keys and say, off you go. So there's other considerations to come into play as well.
Sounds to me like there's a couple of full webinars just on two topics there. There's obviously the grey fleet, but this training with vehicles is a really important part of it. And again, I'm going to pull it back to distraction. If we talk about driver wellbeing, it's one of the key elements of distraction. If you're not familiar with your work environment, then your mind is taken operating different controls and things like that. But your focus isn't where it should be. Hands on the wheel, eyes on the road.
And that's one thing we'll sort of throw here now just for this question. This is a tough one for a lot of organisations. How are you measuring in keeping workers safe in their vehicles on the workplace? Like, I guess the question is something, is it really keeping our workers? Is it lead or lag? Is it a proactive or a reactive sort of situation? Like if it's infringements or things like that, are they well after the facts? And even on the infringement side of thing, is that just ones that are reported to the organisation, or do you actually get some reporting when it comes through and you get an annual check on the driver's licenses? So you see, because unless you actually pull, sometimes drivers might be pulled over or other things happen, or they could, once again, back to the grey fleet, how would the organisation even know what's going on?
Absolutely. While people are perhaps entering in the chat, I'll just quickly share a story. When I was managing a fleet many years ago, a couple of days apart, I received 4 speeding fines for the one vehicle. I thought, surely that can't be true. It was an executive, and they were all for the same day, all in the same afternoon. And what I found out was that he had driven from Melbourne to Geelong and back. And anyone who knows that freeway knows that there's 2 fixed speed cameras on the way there and on the way back. And he went at about 120 on the way there and 120 on the way back. Luckily, it was in a company vehicle, so we were able to see the speeding fines. And at 3 points each, he lost his license in one afternoon.
Yeah. And thank you, Jim. Like you put in there talking about how you use IVMS, you got your 4 to 5 star ANCAP rating, vehicle replacement, pre-start checks, and those sort of components as well. And so obviously the vehicle is considered your thing, and you're looking in that sort of space. Is there a bit of a consideration as well between what the drivers are seeing and the pressure points? So some of them might be the scheduling this time of year, how many deliveries or pressure points or check-ins, or what is actually reasonably practical to achieve in the day, and how you balance the demands between management actually hitting targets, getting things done, between what the driver's sort of feeling. And is the driver empowered where they can say, look, my load is actually filled up at the moment, or things are happening at home?
Yeah. I think I saw in the chat before, and I didn't. It's slipped past now, but somebody trying to put an emoji on there, a thumbs up, thumbs down, or something like that. Coming back to driver wellness again, you know what? It's a nebulous area to try and measure. We can be very clear and precise on the asset and the operation of fleet, but when we talk about driver wellbeing, it can be quite nebulous. A simple check-in where you've got an emoji, you know, a smile, a frown, you know, a blue face, a red face, you know, whatever it would be. It's not a bad way to do that if you can do that regularly, part of your journey management system, perhaps. You know, you're logging where people are starting a journey and finishing a journey, that you also check on how they felt after making that journey, perhaps. So simple things like that can go a long way as well.
It reminds me too of a funny sticker I saw on the back of a company vehicle. I think it might have been in the Northern Territory, where instead of the usual "don't like my driving, call 1-800," etc., it was "don't like my driving."
Again, Jay.
Sorry about that. I'm hoping you can hear me. In the Northern Territory, I saw on the back of a vehicle a sticker that said, "If you don't like my driving, send your your driver cam data through to," and it was an email address. So rather than just ringing and complaining, it was actually email us your dash cam data of the bad driving. I found that very interesting.
That's great. And I think it's like how Jody's put another comment here around sporting clubs, AFL, their players complete wellness checklists at the start and end of each day. And I am aware of a project that'll be coming out soon on some data where drivers wore hexoskins to measure their what's going on internally. And some of the early indications of the analysis of the data is before people actually had a breach, like a speeding or harsh braking or events like this, things were going on inside their body a couple of minutes beforehand, and anxiety and pressure points they could feel, and it always correlated through to an incident a little bit later on. So I think it shows you a lot more things are going on inside the body. And one thing I've just thrown here as well around this, how do we measure safety of the worker? What about sick leave and people taking time off and components like that? Because if people aren't happy at their work, if they're quietly quitting or things like that are going on, maybe there's a bigger conversation to help empower them to say, what is going on? What can we do to fix it, to bring them up? Because one thing is when you're in a car, it's a perfect place to ruminate.
It is. There's that line, isn't there? You know, between sick leave's a really good one, I suppose. You know, individuals are very different. Some individuals are very robust and resilient, others aren't so much, you know, and is that reflecting on their general wellness and their focus? It can be a little bit difficult to determine, but it's a really good indicator of that. Another one for an organisation, things like turnover. You know, turnover could be a number of different things. Could be the work environment, the pay, you know, it could be many things, but it could also be the culture within an organisation as well. If you are an organisation, you are the best sample. You know, if you look at it over time and trend, have you got a spike in turnovers or people not turning up to work and things like that? That might be more indicative of the general mood of the workplace, and maybe you can drill down to the individuals with it.
Some great comments coming through as well. And thank you very much for sharing through the chat, everyone. And looking at this is there's a lot of evidence, and I was talking with Ross earlier, the clear thing, if people are happy in their organisations, their sick leave will drop down to about a half, because obviously in a good sort of place. But is there evidence around drivers matter? And this comes out of another webinar we did in the past around how we drive is how we live, which is how we sort of work, and it also links together. And what you'll see here on the y-axis is around the life satisfaction. And the key things on that, linking together 3 factors, looking at is, does your life have meaning? Are you engaged? And is there pleasure? And if you have all 3 of those things, are nice, picture a little Venn diagram. If you're sitting in the sweet spot in the middle, your life satisfaction is you're flourishing. You're in a really good place. And that's how it is. And you can see how you can sit. But the thing is, the moment you begin declining and one of them gets out of whack, you can see how driver violations begin going up. All of a sudden, you're driving too fast. Your mind might be a little bit fuzzy. You might intend to commit violations because you're pushing the limit all the time. You're sitting over the threshold and you're questioning whether you want to do it. Speed becomes a big part, and you sort of decline as you're going through, as you push the sort of limit, because you're not really concentrating. And just as an example, like if you think about young males, 18 to 24-year-olds, where their scale is out of whack quite often. And I guess we have 4 people on the panel, unfortunately. We should have another gender balance in here as well. But we all go through that stage as a young male, and where we're out of balance from 18 to 24 is our pleasure rating is higher than everything else. So we'll push the limits. We want to have more pleasure from life. Our engagement and meaning drops down. That's why we take a greater risk taking. So we move further along for the risk for driver violations. So it sort of shows you, if you've got meaning because you've got job satisfaction and you're feeling checked in, you're feeling engaged by your organization. So your managers are checking into those points. You've got those regular, like Tim's point on the emoji and those sort of elements, and you're measuring the right sort of thing. Driving matters. Your life satisfaction goes up, so you're flourishing. So this is the big sort of thing. So here's the clear evidence that if you're looking for, this is why it matters to have your work is really engaged, having meaning, but also ensuring they've got pleasure in life. So you got to make sure those little things count as well. Thoughts, guys?
Yeah, Jerome, there's a couple of comments that have come through in the chat there. One is that, people quite often are afraid to speak up. They might not feel good about that. And then there's one at the bottom about truckies. And I just want to sort of reference a piece of work that Jerome's done in the heavy vehicle toolbox talks, and why it makes such a difference. Two things. The first one is that there were 23 toolbox talks, and I had a look at the numbers. 55% of those toolbox talks are specifically related to driver wellness. That's a big shift in the way that a project like that might be run. Things like diet and diet and fitness and fatigue and all the other elements to go with it. The other aspect of it, and I think this is really important, going back to people not wanting to speak up, is one of the key elements is it's peer-to-peer. We got the truck drivers to actually talk about their roles and the issues that they have on a day-to-day basis. And it's those peers talking to their colleagues, I think, that really make a difference with the project, because, people can relate to it. They have the same issues as me, and they're more prepared to talk about it. And when I tried to do that visualization exercise before, I talked about 2 things. Trust and engagement, and they're key to driver wellness. If you don't have the trust and the engagement of the people that are driving cars, whether it is in the workplace or the commute, then you're not going to get too far with them. But if you can get that engagement and trust, it's going to go a long way to helping you with the workers and the drivers, and also with some measurements perhaps as well.
Great words of wisdom there. Paul, Jay, do you want to add anything at all before I move on?
Sorry, it's 100% about the conversation and getting that conversation going and building the trust, as Tim says. And it's about helping them arrive home safely to their families every night. That's what it's all about. And when you emphasize that, the conversation starts. So it's really, open that conversation, make them feel comfortable.
I'd agree.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Jay.
Perfect segue for the next one. Sorry, go Jay.
I'll try my Wi-Fi again. Hopefully Optus doesn't let me down too much. I did an exercise a little while back with a whole heap of garbage truck drivers up in New South Wales, that had a difficulty engaging with management. And we brought them all into the tea room and showed them a couple of videos. And these videos were from a YouTube account that many of you may know, Dashcam Owners Australia. And they show a lot of accidents from dashcam videos. Now, showing these on the big screen, I said to them, just to get this sort of lighten the mood a little bit, guys, just start watching this. This is all on Australian roads, and mind language that you hear every now from some of the dash cams. And they were having a bit of a chuckle at some of these accidents. And then I stopped it and I said, now we're going to show you a few more. And these are all on roads you may recognise. And imagine that you are the driver and you're in your garbage truck, 10 to 15 tonnes. Maybe you've had a bad day. Maybe you're speeding a little bit. Now watch these accidents again and think to yourself, would have I avoided that accident? And if I'd been involved in that accident with my truck, how much worse would it have been rather than just a sedan collision? And all of a sudden, when we're playing these videos again, the laughing and the joking stopped, and they all start looking at each other and going, oh my God, and one bloke there, he said, man, I would have killed that guy. I would have run right over the back of him. So that was an interesting way of being able to get them engaged, get them thinking, oh, actually, I do need to pay more attention. I do have a responsibility because, while we laugh at some of these stupid videos, the dash cam owner type videos of silly accidents happening, when we put it into the context of them behind the wheel, all of a sudden, I wouldn't have avoided that accident. And maybe it might have even been worse if I had been speeding or in a bad mood or had a fully laden vehicle.
Thanks for that, Jay. And now I think we've had some good summaries flowing. I've just gone into this last one, the 5 simple ways to improve your psychological and emotional health, which draws into our toolbox which we put out there. So thank you much, Jim. You've gone through and spoke about 100 mental health first aiders. Look, and here's a number of key themes which was sort of just picked out to try and, obviously there's what organizations can do. How do you raise the bar and really engage? And just an interesting thing I was reading this morning. So over in Sweden, one of the key things they have over there is for organizations is supporting and allowing and helping put these things in place, because they recognize if you've got a flourishing workforce, everyone's actually performing at a higher sort of level. And as an example, how many organizations may have one person that shoots out and gets the coffee? The difference over there is one person doesn't shoot out for the coffee. Everyone as a group walks out for coffee and they all go get together and have as an outing, as a discussion, and they come back to help form that relationship to broaden their networks, which is like the first point we've got in here. Just a question here from Brainy. Turn around. Was that dash cam footage you mentioned, Jay?
Yeah, it was dash cam from Dashcam Owners Australia.
I think one of the fellows in the chat mentioned you might have taken some of their footage. They're not too happy with you on that one. But the other one is the be active. Being active, stimulating, getting yourselves out, doing those little things and just stretching, moving the body. And we always say, like, if you have a 2-hour break, if you're going for those journeys, get out of the car, exit, walk around, have those areas, get the blood moving through the sort of system. And also just prepare little things, giving back, acts of kindness can work really, really well. Be aware of your own. Everyone's body's different. So understand where you're sitting, what you can do. There is no recipe for every single person. Fatigue can hit everyone at different times of the day. Other things are going on. Life is happening, all these other elements. So just be aware of yourself and treat yourself well. We wanted to step back. Dave makes a comment around diet. Here's a crucial thing on those sort of breaks that can go in. And keep learning. That's the other part. This is where you can listen to podcasts. I even think learning can be listening to new music. Things like that. Work out what can stimulate yourselves. Guys, any thoughts around these sort of simple ways that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I was really interested in the comment. I think Jim made it, that their organisation has over 100 mental health first aiders, and that everybody's busy, I guess, is the key to that. For me, I love a phrase, and the phrase is the best example of leadership is leadership by example. It's slow, but it builds. To be an example to the people in your workplace or at home, be the best person that you can be, and all those elements that you've raised there, Jerome, are really important ones. And you know me very well. My simple approach to life is this: exercise often, be curious, enjoy life. It's just an attitude, and I find personally it helps me, but everybody's different. The elements in this are exactly the same. You know, talk to people, develop your relationships and your networks, be active. I couldn't advocate strongly enough how important it is to do something physical every day. It doesn't matter what it is and who you are and, you know, where you are in terms of your fitness. Just get out and do something every day. A walk, a run, you know, whatever it is, something in the garden. Get out of your truck, walk around it during your fatigue breaks. Don't sit at your desk at lunchtime. It's very hard to do, I know. You know, people can be under so much pressure, but get away from your desk, go for a walk around the block or something like that. Helping others and giving back, nothing puts a bigger smile on your face than helping somebody out there. And the other one, the awareness and the learning things. Every day, I turn my phone off and I try to learn something new. And Jerome and I have talked about this before. I just put a focus on my phone and I learn a new skill every day. Sometimes it's something completely useless, but I enjoy doing it. So I think all those elements are really good.
Thanks, Tim. And just looking at in the chat here, thank you so much for sharing. And I must say, this is one of the problems. If you are driving big trucks, where you can pull over in a safe place, and you know, those sort of challenges and those sort of things. The other part's probably realizing when you're feeling tired and fatigued. Fatigue isn't when your eyes are heavy; it's when you're being agitated, knowing what those sort of triggers are. I love the idea of the audio book swap you made a point that day, which was lost on Maruna. Fantastic, and the buddies. If you really and Christian, you made the pointer of stigma. We have there's a micro heavy tool.
Sounds cut out again. Have we lost Jerome?
Lost him altogether. Yep.
There he is. He's back. Yeah. Oh, the one thing that I didn't see in there, Jerome, the 5 diet. That would be the one other element that I think is really important. Nothing too extreme, just
Thanks,
you know,
Tim.
healthy eating.
Awesome. I'll just do a quick. Sorry about that, everyone. The joys of technology. I'm also on Optus, having some issues as well.
Again.
I'll just go into our last closing slide now as well. There we go. There we go. So just some sort of closing sort of questions as we're going through in the last little bit. Hopefully everyone can see that because we're just coming up towards the end of the web at the moment. And just questions to ask us: how different types of events impacts mental health, family? How do I deal with stressful situations myself? What about work stress? Who do you talk to? How empowered are you? How do you have a courageous conversation? Habits or resources? And as I was saying, if you need a great example of, we have a heavy vehicle toolbox talk snippet of a truck driver called Cuz. If you want to go into our webpage, recommend checking him out. And here's an amazing truck driver for Q who just shows how easy it is. I think it could empower all truck drivers and saying, well, this is what it can do. And look, pulling over and checking on someone is more important than the delivery time. He makes that very clear. Question. Any last things in the last, we'll go through. May you please repeat the last toolbox talk for heavy vehicles. You were cut off. We'll put the link in when it goes out tomorrow, and I'll link to the Cuz webinar. And we'll also link to this toolbox talk that we've been drawing of. So just in the last sort of minute, I'll go off to Paul. What's your closing thoughts?
I think it's important that we do open those conversations up, ask people, are they okay? And, you know, be aware of how people are feeling. And if they're not feeling right, have that discussion and help them out. And it could be that, you know, maybe they shouldn't be driving that day.
Tim?
Yeah, much the same. I think collectively as organisations, no matter what aspect of vehicle usage you're talking about, we've come a long way. We've gone from looking at the asset to improved toolkits such as telematics, where we can monitor driver behaviour, and you know, evidenced by what we've just seen with the heavy vehicle toolbox talks. I think we're really moving into the area of driver wellness, and it's not just the heavy vehicle toolbox talks, but it's the work that people are doing in general, reflecting on some of the profound and traumatic changes that we've had over recent years. We've been locked away. We are polarized by media and social media. All of these have an impact on driver wellness. These are all things that we carry with us 24 hours a day. And we've got to come to terms with how we can make sure that our drivers are safe and the community generally on the road is safe each day. Jerome's gone again.
Again, I'll quickly wrap up on my side of things. We've touched on how dangerous driving really is. And as I see it in the industry at the moment, driver wellbeing is still somewhat, the awareness of it is still somewhat in its infancy. We're not quite there yet. When you look at, say, workplace health and safety, we've been talking about it for decades and decades now. Anyone can walk into an office or a workplace because we're conditioned now. We look for things like, the chair is not ergonomic, or the carpet's ripped, or there's a cable that might be a tripping hazard. We've all been somewhat conditioned through years and years of messaging and communication and education. We need to get to that point with driver training, driver wellbeing, and driver education. And that's going to take time, but it's going to take constant messaging. But it's similar to the workplace health and safety. Once you start it, you can't stop it, because then the message will get stale and people will move on to other things. It needs to be reinvigorated, changed a little bit. But every year there needs to be a new focus on some sort of driver wellbeing, driver education, and keep that messaging going so that all of our drivers are then conditioned to look out for the signs, not only in themselves, but in some of their colleagues as well.
Yeah.
Well, and I'll just snuck on back. I think what I'll do now is I think Zoom's giving me the hint that I'm about to die. So thank you everyone for your time and persevering with us today. I missed some of the closing comments from everyone. And thank you for persevering with us all. We will include some links in the Rego following up from this tomorrow. It was a great discussion with everyone, and in particular with our everyone on the line as well. Thank you for contributing. And until next time, take care and drive safe.
Yep. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.